Well, good morning. It's great to see so many people here, particularly after the holiday of Yom Kippur. It's wonderful to be back. The last time I was speaking before you, how many of you remember that? Great. It was about 2.5 years ago. And I want to begin where we were 2.5 years ago. And I think that it will shed some insight on why I opted not to run for mayor and instead have chosen to continue my quest to be San Diego's voice in the U.S. Congress. 2.5 years ago, I presented to you something called the Roadmap to Recovery, 350-page fiscal recovery plan for San Diego. When I took office in 2008, people were predicting the bankruptcy of our city. And every budget that was being proposed had red ink as far as the eye could see, and they were cutting real important programs to our communities. Road repairs, police and fire coverage, after-school programs were decimated. And I said, look, we shouldn't be forced to choose between raising our taxes dramatically or gutting and cutting the very quality of life services that our neighborhoods require. We need to rethink how our city government spends the existing money we provide them. We need to reinvent and transform how we operate. We need to embrace technology. We need to change the culture. We need to look at our operating costs. We need to look at partnerships, because I believe that we can do things far more efficiently. We can be far more accountable. And that's where the Roadmap to Recovery was born. The ideas in that plan were not mine alone. Most of those ideas came from people exactly like you. Successful community leaders who own their own companies, who have senior positions in nonprofits, in government, and in the private sector, who said, hey, I'm looking at what you guys are doing for pothole repairs, and I got to call a number. Why not use a smartphone and make it available 24/7 and use GPS to track the location down to the foot of where the pothole is? Someone gave me that idea. My office launched the first citizens engagement app for San Diego 311. So we took these ideas and we said, let's roll them into a plan, like what you would see a bankruptcy judge order in bankruptcy court, but let's skip the stigma, the expense, and the legal troubles of going bankrupt. So I came here to the temple and I presented the plan. And a lot of people thought it never can happen. Yeah, it looks good on paper, but you can't really get change to happen in government because people can come up with good ideas all they want. The status quo, the special interests, they'll stop any good idea. And I asked you for some help. I said, we're going to present this plan to the city council. Is this okay? Yeah. We're going to present this plan to the city council. And if they won't vote it into law, we are going to take the issue to the streets. We're going to file a citizens initiative. We're going to work with Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, and every community group to get this thing qualified and give the public a vote. Well, two things happened. First, we got the vast majority of the ideas in that plan implemented on a bipartisan vote through City Council. Now, it wasn't easy, because ordinarily they would reject the ideas at first, but then I would introduce certain concepts, and we would then get a couple of those into the bills. One after another, after another, after another. The hardest part was getting pension reform. And some of you may not know that we went into closed session, just the City Council. And the City Council, on an 8-0 vote, Democrats and Republicans, said, all right, Carl, we're going to take your pension reform initiative and we're going to open negotiations with the unions to see if they would be willing to enter into an agreement to implement pension reform. 8-0 vote. Most people don't recognize that we were able to do that in closed session. As you know, the union said, take a hike, we're not interested in reforming the pensions. And remember, what we were dealing with at the time was a pension bill that was exploding from $40 million a year in 2000 to $232 million in 2010. And every dollar of increase had to come from somewhere. So your water bill went up, fees went up, and of course, services got cut. So that we could move the money from important priorities in the neighborhoods and put that money into that pension system. What were the benefits like? I have no problem paying as an employer, and as a taxpayer I would expect paid, fair, honorable, reliable, and competitive competitive wages to our city employees. They work hard and they ought to receive anything that they would receive from any other employer in our market. Down to the penny, no better, no worse. But the system allowed them to retire at age 50. Standard retirement age is 50 for police and fire, 55 for everyone else. And we were seeing employees retire, earning in their first year of retirement more in pension payouts than their highest salary actually working. We found some city employees getting 4 retirement allowances from the city of San Diego alone. Remember the librarian earning $232,000 a year? Double what she was earning at her highest salary. We had an independent commission, an independent actuary commissioned to study the average that a city employee receives. This is white collar, blue collar. After 30 years of service, receiving 129% of their highest salary for life, plus Medicare and $800 supplemental payment per year for extra insurance. Again, no one will take the position, I hope no one will take this position, that city employees should be given any less than what they would receive for doing the same work in the private sector, nonprofit sector, or local. We ought to be an employer of choice. We ought to benchmark our benefits and compensation against what the market requires. But when we give benefits that are not sustainable and are not in line with the local labor market, not only is it wasteful, but it is also unfair and insulting to taxpayers who are working hard and not receiving the services or the benefits that they should receive. So we took that pension ballot measure and we filed it. And we had those special interests block us from the signatures. But I know many of you actually helped out collecting signatures. I saw you standing in front of the stores. And some of you come up and sign it based upon our request through the robocalls that you do it. And we were able to pass this initiative in June of 2012 with 68% of the vote. And by the way, just to show how nonpartisan and unifying this issue was, that pension ballot measure carried every city council district, every district. It carried every political party, Democrat, Independent, Republican. It carried every socioeconomic group, Latinos, Asians, African Americans. It really was a consensus of this city that we have to make reforms happen. It was a remarkable moment for our city. It was a big accomplishment, and all of us worked together to do that against some pretty powerful groups that did not want to see pension reform. We got a lot done in San Diego. A lot more has to be done. But as I pivoted from the November election, and it broke my heart, I appreciate the fact that many of you crossed party lines to support me, as did many other Democrats in the city. It was always remarkable driving through neighborhoods and seeing Obama signs right next to my signs in someone's yard. And what we ran on was a very simple platform. We took the roadmap to recovery and we said, there should be no Democrat label on a good idea, there should be no Republican label on a good idea, we should just be looking for a San Diego label. Can it work here in San Diego? Can it benefit our neighborhoods? I don't care if an idea comes from a Democrat or a Republican, if it's a good idea, I'm going to get up, I'm going to fight, I'm going to try to support it. People, gave me a lot of grief when I first came into office for partnering up with Donna Fry on a series of open government reforms. Well, I was happy to work with her. I think she's right on open government. And we got a lot of things done. Ultimately, one of the last pieces of legislation that I was able to get through City Council is one of the ones that I was the most proud of, because I think it will have the most impact long term, was something called the Sunshine Act. And what it said is any information in the city government should be placed online for the public to search and see. All contracts, the checkbook, all compensation, any solicitations. We need to get rid of no-bid contracts, so we need to list the number of bids on every contract so that there is a sole source contract, the public knows. We have a right to know whether someone was hotwired for that contract, and we need to ask the questions. The transparency that was needed. It's neither a Democrat or Republican issue. This should be just a good government issue. I was looking at what happened in the election, and what we saw in the polling, we were carrying a 5-6 point lead every single night in our tracking polling for 45, 55 days. But the last weekend, the last 72 hours, our 5-point lead dropped to complete dead heat. And ultimately we lost by a point. Where did those votes come from? Well, we asked a question in the poll that said, have you heard of Carl DeMaio, Bob Filner, or the mayor's race in the last 2 or 3 weeks? Do you know that on election day, it was not 100% of people who knew? It was only 80% who had heard any of those 3 terms. And of those 80% that said, yeah, I've heard something about one of those 3 terms, we carried 54-46. People actually hearing about the race, paying some sort of attention, 54-46. That last 20% who answered on election day, nope, haven't heard anything about this guy, Bob Filner. Who's he? Who's Carl DeMaio? Is there a mayor's race? Of that last 20%, we lost 68-32, overwhelmingly. And my pollster said when you look at it, it seems to be that people who are younger and more democratic, they're looking just for the party label. I wish we lived in a society where labels were not the shorthand, that people would be actually willing to look at individuals beyond the label for what they believe in, for what they've accomplished, for what they hope to accomplish in the future. But that's politics. It frustrates us. We can either decide that we're going to let that happen in the future, or we can try to change it. So after the election, I committed myself to try to challenge the Republican Party to embrace change. And I wrote an op-ed a couple weeks after the election where I kind of said, here's what I learned running for mayor, here are the things that we were really proud of, and here are the things that really were frustrating. And the first thing I said was that the Republican Party nationally did not do what we did locally, which is we didn't just say no. We said, what can be done to solve the problem? And we didn't look for a Republican way to solve a problem, we looked for any good idea that we could put into the plan. And we're willing to work across party lines. And we build coalitions with people who agree with the ideas, not the label. If a party wants to have the honor of governing in this country, you must provide solutions. You cannot just say, I'm standing on principle and voting no. Fine, stand on principle. We want people to stand on principle. But how would you solve the problem of education? How would you solve the problem of healthcare accessibility? How do you make sure that we can protect the environment? These are important questions that shouldn't have a Democrat or Republican label on them. We'd like to know your solution. If you don't like this idea, what would you be willing to vote for if we presented it in a package? Second, stop writing off entire communities. I heard during the campaign a lot of consultants say, oh, don't worry about the Latino community. They're never going to vote for you anyway. And I overrode them and I said, we are going to invest in that community. Because I actually think we got good ideas that will benefit that community. But more importantly, I want them to know that even if I don't earn their vote, they are going to have my service. They know that I am going to be interested in what issues they care about. I went to a town hall in Encanto that we organized. Encanto is southeast San Diego. And it's a very heavily Latino area of our city. We had our walkers knock on every door, talk to Latinos at the door. They were bilingual walkers. We had bilingual campaign materials. So these people showed up, and I had a lady come up to me and she said, are you Republican? I said, yes, ma'am, I am. She said, well, I can't believe it. I read about that in the paper, but I don't believe it. I said, well, why? Because you're here. Because you're here. Republicans don't come to Encanto. And this was probably August or September of 2012. And I said, well, ma'am, this isn't my first time in Encanto. I was here campaigning against the sales tax in 2010. I was here collecting signatures and campaigning for pension reform in our initiative in 2011 and 2012. I'm here today, and I'm going to be, as your mayor, here anytime this community needs help. So one of the things I pointed out is that no party can sit there and say, well, we're going to write off Latinos, we're going to write off Asians, we're going to write off the Jewish community, we're going to write off young voters, we're going to write off women, we're going to write off... who do you have left? Who do you have left? And it shouldn't just be, well, we think we can win a majority of votes there. Well, that's not the only reason why you need to go to a community. You need to go to a community because the obligation of governing is that you look beyond just people who voted for you and you are taking care of the public interest at all times. You're also likely to learn some good ideas and some concerns that that community has that you may not be aware of if for the very reason that you didn't show up and listen. So going to communities has to be first with an intent to listen to their concerns, solicit their ideas, and hopefully over a period of time, generate support and gain their trust and support. And then finally I said, we have many issues in this country. We have notorious fiscal crisis issues with national debt that continues to balloon. We've got an economic crisis where regulation is stifling small business, where people don't feel comfortable and confident investing anymore, hiring. There's a lot of examples of regulations where small business owners have decided not to hire that extra employee, have decided to cut people's hours. That's having a major impact on working families. We have programs in government that are broken. Veterans who have to wait 600 days to get their benefits. That's patently unacceptable. It's outrageous. Yet we continue to have debates about what people do in their personal lives. The federal government can't balance the budget. They can't get veterans their benefits in a timely manner, but they're going to tell us how to live our lives in the privacy of our bedrooms. Outrageous. And so let's focus on getting the issues that government has an obligation to provide solutions on, and let those other issues up to individuals to decide in the context of their family and their faith. And let's treat those issues with the element of respect that they are due. That people have hard, long-standing, deeply felt beliefs on those issues that government not ought to prescribe or pontificate on, but let people decide that in the context of their circumstance, their family, and their faith. Now, when I laid this out, I got a lot of people that were really excited. And it wasn't just Republicans, but Democrats and independents. They were like, yeah, that's important that we have people do that in both sides of these political parties. And boy, that would be a breath of fresh air in Washington. And after a lot of discussions, I did ultimately decide that just as we took our reform agenda to San Diego City Hall and made a lot of progress, I believe we can take a reform agenda to the Congress, this philosophy. Now, as Peter was saying, when I was walking door to door, I heard a lot of people's ideas about what they wanted to do at the City Hall, but the number one question I received, actually there were two questions. First was, you can't make any difference down there, you're just one person. Heard a lot. I hear a lot about that in my quest for Congress. Well, you're just one of 435. You're not going to be able to do much. I actually think that we can do a lot. I have no problem being the skunk at the garden party. I look forward to it, because sometimes in order to create change, you gotta provoke a discussion on issues that most people don't want to talk about. And I think that voice will be joined with many other voices in Washington and across the country that recognize that we have issues and that the old paradigm of solving problems is not working. So I'm really confident that yes, one voice with several other voices across the country can start creating critical mass and change, because that's what we did in San Diego city government. The second thing, which is remarkable, is a lot of people said, oh, I know you from your watchdog work, and I like the fact that you're walking door to door. But once you get down there, you're going to change. You're going to drink the Kool-Aid. You're going to become that very system. All those powerful interests are going to push on you and prod, and they're going to want you to change. I think if anyone's been watching, I think that the record stands very clearly that I've had no problem speaking truth to power, ruffling some feathers. In fact, the don't drink the Kool-Aid, for those of you who've been to my office, I know some of you have been to my office down at City Hall, when you walk in, a poster greeted you right in the entryway. It's a big jar of Kool-Aid, and it says, don't drink the Kool-Aid. So everybody who met with me, from lobbyists to city employees to constituents, knew I'm not here to just simply go along. I'm here to take the voice of the people and fight as hard as I can to make sure that that's represented in city government. Great example was the new City Hall project. Remember, they wanted to build a $400 million, million square foot new City Hall in the middle of a bad economy, in the middle of a budget crisis, while our roads weren't being repaired. They were also talking about raising taxes during this time. And we had a 30% vacancy rate in downtown San Diego for commercial real estate. And anyone who knows economics, I mean, it's clear, how crazy this idea is. We have a glut of office space downtown, and what does the city decide to do? Flood the market with 1 million square feet of Class A office space. And I said, we can't do this project. Let's renegotiate our rates, our leases. We are in the best position as a tenant that we will ever be in. Let's renegotiate. after killing the project, we found that we were saving millions of dollars by renegotiating our leases. But one of the things that was interesting is that a lot of people who supported me came to me and they're like,